Hi everyone, Adrian from Audio Excellence. Forgive my gum, my mouth is very dry, so I thought I'd just chew some gum. Okay. I thought I'd cover some of the worst electronics I've ever owned. Just for fun. I was just thinking about what other topics I could do while the guys are so busy that we can't get together as a group. So, so this is not a comprehensive list. It's just off the top of my head some of the nightmares I had to deal with, and these are literally nightmares. Before I go further, I should also say, well, no, let me get into it and I'll explain it. Okay. I should also note that some of these things were some of my favorites sonically at the time. It's just one of those love-hate relationships. Okay, first, Musical Fidelity A1, the original version, not the one that they just re-released. At the time, the manufacturer said this was a pure Class A, if I remember correctly, 20-watt amplifier. It looked cool. It from a form factor wise, aesthetically, it was very cool compared to everything else back then. The NAD at the time was the most boring, black-looking box. It was meant to be that way. The whole point was the competition from Fisher, Marantz, Sony, JVC. They were all receivers with lots and lots of buttons and lights and all kinds of things. And then here you had NAD, which was basically a black box with a volume control and I think a couple switches, and that was it. The Musical Fidelity, on the other hand, had this beautiful sculpted front panel and with heat sinks at the top. It looked really nice. I think blue lettering. I still have one in my office. So I've told the story before, but just so for those of you who don't know, I had bought a pair of Bose 901s. I was stunned at how bad it sounded to me. I was disconsolate. I couldn't understand why the speaker that was so highly regarded and so highly reviewed sounded so bad. And a couple, 3 months later, I'm going through the yellow pages. Yes, there was such a thing for people of Allison's age. You don't know what the yellow pages was, but back then, one of the ways that you could market yourself was to buy a little tiny ad in the yellow pages with your phone number, and you could say you were a high-end audio store and so on. And it was done alphabetically. So I was going through the stereophonic list, and there was a store called Ring Audio, and it wasn't all that far away from where I was staying at the time in university, so I thought I'd walk down and check them out. I walked into this relatively small store, beautifully kept, and this gentleman was very nice to help me. And I remember walking into this tiny room, and these tiny little speakers were playing, and they blew me away. I mean, I was stunned at how beautiful it sounded. Made even more shocking because I've got these Bose 901s that were supposed to be one of the world's best speakers, and here are these tiny little speakers that took my breath away. Anyway, as we got to listen to the system, he told me that he was using this little tiny box called the Musical Fidelity A1. I bought one. Within, I think, a week, the thing blew up. I mean, it literally stopped working. The top was so hot, it was insane. I mean, it was really, really, really hot. Anyway, brought it back. Guy goes, yeah, I forgot to tell you. The amplifier can overheat, so you have to be careful. I'm thinking, how do I deal with this? I didn't have any money. And he says, well, just put a fan over it. So that's what I did. But again, sooner or later, I must have had it repaired 3 or 4 times before I finally gave up on it. Thankfully, it was under warranty, but it was insane. But having said that, I remembered how beautiful it sounded. So a few years ago, one dropped into my lap. The client just basically said, here, I'm sick of repairing this thing. You can have it. And of course, the first thing I did was call Carlo, my technician back then, and I said, can you fix it? He took a look at it. He said, yeah, I can fix it. He fixed it, and of course he said, this thing is going to blow up again because it's hot. It gets very, very hot. I said, I know. And from that point on to this day, I've never, ever turned it on. It's still in my office, sitting there, partly to remind me of what a crazy industry we're in, where you can love something so deeply and yet it's so deeply flawed. Okay, that's the first one. The next two are tube amplifiers. As a matter of fact, most of the rest are tube amplifiers. Conrad Johnson Premio 1 and 5. Those of you who go back enough will remember these amplifiers. They were very highly regarded by both Stereophile and Absolute Sound. Big amplifiers. Again, when they worked, they, to me, sounded beautiful. They had this beautiful golden rich sound, very tube-like. All the things that you think tubes should be, these were. With authority, good bass, especially for its time. Not the most transparent, certainly not the most accurate, not the most see-through, not very fast. But in its time, in comparison to the arch rival, the Audio Research, it had this rich golden glow about it. But the Audio Research was, on the other hand, more transparent, bigger soundstage, more see-through, all the things that Audio Research is famous for. So why didn't I like them? Well, I love them. But again, they blew up a lot. To be fair, I bought these used back in the, I want to say, early to mid-90s. And it's certainly possible that the tubes that I was able to get at the time were not great tubes. Again, many of you may not relate to this, but back in the 80s and 90s, the only tubes that you could really buy were from Russia and, well, I guess still the same, Russia and China. And the tubes that we generally saw were not all that great. They didn't last all that long. Some of them were quite noisy and so on. It could certainly be that. I haven't since had the experience again with those amplifiers, but I want to say, replaced tubes at least 2 or 3 times on both models. Again, love-hate relationship. Next tube amplifiers, the original Jadi JA200s and the JA80s. They were noisy. Well, the 200 was not all that reliable. I did experience some tube problems. But more of a problem was the humming that you would sometimes get through the speakers. My technician, who eventually had a chance to look at it, suggested that it could be that the power supply was originally designed for European standards and never quite designed for North America. I'm assuming he's correct because it makes sense. I mean, there's all kinds of European products that come into North America, don't have an issue, but these ones certainly did, the first generation ones. But when they worked, again, if you could ignore some of the buzzing from the transformer and sometimes through the speakers, they were absolutely magical. They combined that glow of the Conrad Johnson with the beautiful transparency of the Audio Research, with heft and conviction in the bass. Marvelous amplifiers. Another set of tube amplifiers, the Mentmore, also known as the TVA Electronics M200 monoblocks. They were very sweet sounding, not quite as golden, not quite as rich as the Conrad Johnsons. Slow, but plenty of power. And they weren't all that expensive either, which was kind of nice. And they weighed a ton. But again, horrible failures. It might just be me. I just, at the time didn't have very good luck with tube amplifiers, even though I kept trying. And again, it could also, be the tubes. I don't know. All I can tell you is that went through a lot of tubes, cost a lot of money. This one is a peach. How do I say this nicely? I don't think the company exists anymore, and if they do, what the hell? I picked up this line, Antique Sound Labs, and one day I was on the main floor in the store. At the time, we had this old century home, so it was 2 levels, 3 levels, including the basement. And this pair of amplifiers was playing background to break in. And I was on the main floor at the cash area helping a client and so on. Suddenly I smell something burning. And simultaneously, the client looks at me and says, "Do you smell something burning?" I said, "I do." I ran upstairs and the amplifier was on fire. I mean, literally on fire. I had to run back downstairs to the kitchen area, grab a fire extinguisher, come back up, and anyway. That was the end of my, little episode with the company. I remember, I think it was Absolute Sound who really loved these amps. I didn't. Nothing worse than having a nightmare thinking, God, if I had sold this line, and it may just be me, because I certainly don't know of anybody else who has experienced this with this particular line, but I had nightmares after that, thinking, imagine the liability where I sell something like that and the thing catches fire and the person's not home, or God forbid, he's home with kids and so on. Oh my God. Anyway, next, Audion Silver Knight 300Bs. Again, this is going back in the late 1990s, early 2000s. I bought a pair. I was thinking about being a dealer. As a matter of fact, no, we were a dealer. Played with it. Again, beautiful sound. 300Bs, delightful. This was at the time when I was, the 300, the whole single-ended movement was starting all over again. And Stereophile had the cover where it showed a Cary single-ended amplifier, C-A-R-Y. And then I think it was a Krell, a big Krell amplifier, and it was side by side. And I can't remember the tagline, but it was something like, both can't be right. You know, either Allison or Mike will look up the cover and you can see what it looks like. Anyway, the 300, it sounded glorious with certain types of speakers. Problem again. It could be, again, at the time, noisy. You needed to use extremely efficient speakers. And at the time, extremely efficient speakers, I guess still to this day, were primarily horns. And I didn't care for horns. And so while I loved what I could hear, I could also hear the weaknesses, for me, of those horn speakers. And so ultimately, and then of course, the horns amplified the noise of the amplifier, and so ultimately I had to give up on it. I won't say that it's like the worst amplifier by any means. I just put it here because it was the first thing that came to my mind, but again, love-hate relationship. This last one for now is a solid-state amplifier, and again, if you go back enough, you'll remember these. It was the Mark Levinson number 20.5. Actually, there were a series, I guess. They started off as the number 20, then became a 20.5 and 20.6. A client had called me, old client of mine, and said, Adrian, I'm downsizing. This is, again, back in the mid-2000s. I've got these Mark Levinsons. I want to trade in for something much simpler, maybe a Krell integrated. Can you help me? I said, absolutely. Are you kidding me? All my life, I always wanted to, at the time, be a Mark Levinson dealer. I was already a big Krell dealer. I always also wanted to be a Mark Levinson dealer because the two were like competitors of the most vicious, in the sense that you either love Mark Levinson or you love Krell. They're very, very different in so many ways. And since I couldn't be a dealer, here was an opportunity to buy, at the time, their top-of-the-line amplifier. And so I did the trade, took it back home to the store, plugged it in, and one channel wasn't working. Contacted the owner, and he says, I haven't used it in the longest time, which was true. It was just sitting in the corner. So I contacted the factory. They were not supporting it anymore. And there was no way to fix it. My technician at the time, Carlo, said, let me take a crack at it, because he was originally a Mark Levinson authorized technician. And he went through the whole thing, and it worked for a little bit, and then it stopped working again. And anyway, eventually we had to give up because it just wasn't worth taking any further. So here I have monoblocks that only one channel worked and the other channel didn't. It became an extremely expensive door style. I eventually sold the pair at a huge loss because I had to find somebody who wanted one working amplifier and the other one maybe for parts. So that was not a good thing. Anyway, this will be it for this particular part of the video. If you like this kind of video, let me know. Put your comments below. So I really would love to read your comments about your worst experiences with amplifiers, electronics, and so on. Might stir some other memories in this old brain of mine. Anyway, thanks for watching. We'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.